All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Missouri Humanities Virtual Capacity Building Workshop on Grant Writing. Today's workshop is being presented by Jackie Spainhower and Jamie Kleinsorge. Jackie is a community development specialist for MU Extension. She has over 23 years of experience in researching, collaborating, and writing grants for small nonprofit and local government agencies in Northwest Missouri. Jamie is an assistant director and senior project coordinator at the University of Missouri Extension Center for Applied Research and Engagement Systems. Jamie has trained thousands of organizations, community professionals, government agencies, and healthcare systems on the use of data and GIS for community assessment, planning, and evaluation. Jamie holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in rural sociology. During today's workshop, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. If not during the presentation, we'll address them at the end. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jackie and Jamie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. So I am super excited to be here. And just to maybe add on a little bit to my bio, you can see on the slide that we have what Nick provided to you. But my background and my undergraduate degree is in art and design. And so I have written grants for 23 plus years in Northwest Missouri and Northeast Kansas. And the favorite projects that I have been those that have had a design element or a historic preservation element to them. And so if any of you are on the west side of the state or visitors to Atchison, Kansas, if you drive across the Amelia Earhart Bridge into Atchison at night, if you'll see some beautiful LED lights, I wrote the grant that got the LED lights for the Atchison Bridge there for Kansas. That has been one of my favorite grants that I have prepared in the past. But I've also done some preservation grants for courthouses and train depots, everything from restoring old stained glass windows and tuck pointing the old brick. And so those are some of the things that I love to do. Um, I would like to say that I have to admit that a lot of the grant writing I have done has been infrastructure related. So water, sewer, streets, and then some programs like workforce development, traffic safety, and more. So I have a wide span of grant writing background. Jamie, do you want to add anything to your bio?
No, I just want to thank you all for having me here today. And unlike Jackie, I haven't done a lot with transportation and infrastructure, but I have done a lot with healthcare and public health. And so I would say that's probably where more of my specialty lies, and then also in rural populations. So thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks, Jamie. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I just want to do a quick poll um, from 1 to 10, meaning 1 that you have no experience with grant writing to 10 that you could probably run circles around me with grant writing. Just let us know what your experience is. And if you would drop that in the chat, we'll kind of keep that information as we go through the programming today, as well as we'll look at it afterwards and see what kind of the role of grant writing is in Missouri and what people are doing. So those are coming in great. Thank you so much. But we do have a lot of information, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I have another quick question for you. One of the things that I am doing right now with some colleagues is creating an Extension Grant Writing 101 class. And so we are in development and we're looking at these different topics to include in this class. And it's going to be an online class, hopefully launched sometime in later 2025. And if you would look at that list from where to find grants, collaboration, and all the different topics, and in the chat, just tell me what you are most interested in. And that will help us guide our development of that program. And so I'm going to let you do that, but we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar and the content. So really our learning objectives for today is we're going to cover the basics. I found a really great extension guide Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Extension guide put together by one of my colleagues, Mallory Ray, who is the education director for Ag Business. She put together this guide that tells basically all the steps that you have to go through to write a grant and put together a successful proposal. It doesn't have to do with ag. It's commonplace that it can work across all different disciplines, but it's going to be the basis of our conversation today. Within that, step 5, we're going to take a really deep dive into some tools and resources that will help you put together your proposals. We're going to look at SMART goals, which a lot of you have already probably learned. We're going to do a refresh. Jamie's going to take you through all things Missouri, which is our resource in extension to find data. And that's going to help you find demographic questions as well as find collaborators. And then we'll also look at how we can put together logic models. Some of you that are new, I saw lots of 1s and 2s and 3s coming in the chat, probably have not been introduced to logic models yet. And so that's going to be a way to take your projects from ideas to actual outcomes. So hopefully we get through all that and then we have some time for questions and answers. So let's jump in to step 1. The first thing that I like to talk to people about when you write grants is you have to prioritize what you want to do. I don't know how many times I have worked for someone who has said, "Hey, I found this grant. What can we do for it?" That is not the way to go about writing grants. What you need to do is you need to look at maybe what you want and what you need grant funding for within your organization. And most of the funders are going to want to see results for the use of their dollars. They don't just want to see, random activities or random things. And so, examples of the new projects or the programs that you can put together may include a new exhibit. I have a feeling a lot of you on the call today are from museums or different types of agencies that put together exhibits. So, is it a new exhibit? Do you need a new facility? Is it a new brick and mortar? Or do you have a new innovative program? But sometimes you can find grants if you're really, really lucky that will assist with operating expenses or other initiatives that you may be already working on. So you can actually bring in some grant dollars to supplement what you're already doing. So I do want to emphasize that grant writing will be so much easier if you know what your needs are. You may have an idea in mind, or you may need to do some strategic planning to help determine your priorities. So, do some visioning with your team. Ask them, what do we want to be? What do we want to see this time next year, maybe in 5 years? And then note where some funding might be able to help you explore those opportunities. With most grant programs, your usually announcements are funding only once a year. And so it may take several months before you get a decision back. So you can be prepared and start thinking ahead before those grant calls are made. I know Missouri Humanities, I was just talking to Nick, he says they make calls twice a year. So be aware of those dates and start preparing way before you get those grant calls out. So step 2 is searching for grants. You're going to want to look for grants that are relevant to your priorities. There's a lot of places on this list, on this slide, where you can look. Not all of them are going to be relevant. Some people that I've worked with in the past do not want to get a government grant. So do not go to grants.gov. But if you're interested in exploring some of those federal grant funds like USDA or HUD grants, definitely check out grants.gov. It's a wonderful search base for you to look for availability of grants through the federal government. Sometimes the state agencies are a little bit harder to find some of those grants. You might need to go to their own individual websites to find out what their grants are. So look at those state agencies. So check out the Division of Family Services or the Division of Health and Human Services. Check those out and see what their grants are available. Make friends with with their workers from those places, from people in those agencies. Federal agency websites do the same thing. Sometimes you can go to foundation websites themselves and find where their charitable giving or their foundation giving is at. And community foundations. If you have a community foundation in your community, definitely check those out because a lot of times they will subscribe to databases and allow you access to those paid subscription services where you can search for grant opportunities. Another place, and this is my passion, I worked in regional planning commissions for 12 years of my 23 professional career, and regional planning commissions are hidden gems. They're kind of like extension. If you have a project that may want to partner with a city or community or a county on, definitely your regional planning commission has access to maybe community development block grants that can help nonprofits or USDA rural development grants. So check those out. Other great places to look are your local libraries and your local banks. So step 3 is you're going to navigate a grant application. So you found a grant application that you want to apply for, you're interested in. The first thing you have to do is carefully read the application and its guidelines and any other resources that this funder has provided. The application and the guidelines should explain the program's purpose, your eligible applicants, allowable expenses, expectations, deadlines, and other rules to follow. Me personally, I like to print a copy of the grants that I am interested in and then start highlighting all the key points. Am I eligible? Am I meeting their funding guidelines? If you have questions while reviewing an application, do not hesitate to call the funding agency. A lot of times they will give you a person's name and contact information to contact with questions. This is a great person to get to know so that they anticipate and can ask some questions about your project. And so even if you have to make up a good question to connect with them, I would advise to do that. It's always good to reach out to your funding agencies. Um, so step 4 is where you have to stop. And this is a stop because you now have all the guidelines in front of you, and you need to make sure that you are eligible for the grant. You need to make sure that your priorities align with the funding agency's priorities, and that if whether or not this strategy of applying is the best for you, because grant writing is time consuming and you can get in the weeds pretty quick before you find out, oh, we're not even eligible for the grant. Why did we spend 30 hours on a grant we can't even utilize? So just because a grant program exists, it doesn't mean that it's a good fit for you. So I want to do just an example. So here we have your museum's number one priority is to secure funding for operating expenses, including salary, benefits, and indirect costs for your existing staff. You have an available grant opportunity that has just been announced. Funding agency ABC just opened their annual grant application, and their priority in 2025 is to fund innovative educational programs for up and coming youth artists. The grant allows for salary and benefits for the staff directing the new program. Do you apply for this grant? And you can answer yes or no in the chat. I'm just kind of curious if some of you are experienced grant writers would apply for this grant for your agency. I've got a no and a yes and a no. No, 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 no. Lots of no's. And I'm going to throw a curveball because I originally, when I put that together, I went no. Oh, there you go. Danielle got it. About yesterday, I changed my answer to a maybe. And the reason that that might be a maybe is because you may already have somebody in your organization that is working on up and coming youth artists. And so there is an opportunity for you to find some funding to apply towards the work that they may already doing with some tweaks with that grant funding priorities. So I would say exactly, Kiba, you have to be creative. So if you are definitely not eligible for the grant, I would say, nope, we're not going to apply for it. But if there are ways that you can be creative and start to think about how you might be able to fit this grant application or this funding priority with your agency's needs, apply for the grant. Just make sure that you are eligible before you do it. So step 5, and this is where we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty of our conversation today. Um, Step 5 is where you're gonna actually plan your project. Oops, I keep getting on the wrong page here. You're gonna actually start putting together your project. And it's a good idea to identify the potential grant that you're eligible for, that it aligns with your priorities, and then you're gonna outline your goals. And so Jamie and I are gonna quickly cover a few resources and tools that you can use to plan that project. They cover 4 parts, and so I don't want you to get lost in the presentation because we will come back to step 6 eventually. But I'm gonna walk you through a quick refresh on SMART goals, and then Jamie's gonna share with you on steps 5B and steps 5D on finding partnerships, as well as finding data for your grant application. And then I'll come back after Jamie's done and we'll take a quick look at logic models and how they can help you create a plan for achieving your goals. So addressing that 5C. So SMART goals. I bet a lot of you have already learned about SMART goals at some point in your careers or in your professional identities that you work with. So the first thing that you want to do when you do SMART goals is you have to describe what the SMART means. SMART goals are specific. So when you write a goal, is it concrete and well defined? And SMART goals are measurable. Can you track the results of your actions as we move toward achieving a goal? Will we know that change has occurred? And then SMART goals are achievable. What behaviors do you want to see, or what behaviors have you indicated progress in your goal? SMART goals are relevant. They are related to overall outcome that you want to see in your organization, and they are time bound. Usually, SMART goals will define a goal and how long it will take to achieve, or when you expect to have the goal completed. So, we're just going to do a real quick activity. So, let's look at some examples. By the end of 2025, we will increase youth attendance at St. Louis Arts Museum by 25% by featuring art exhibits, activities, and events targeting to youth ages 16 to 18. And this is how that breaks down into our SMART goal. By the end of 2025 is our time bound. We will increase youth attendance in St. Louis art museums by 25%. That is both measurable and achievable. And by featuring art exhibits, activities, and events, it's specific, targeted to youth ages 6 to 18. So it is relevant to what you want to see happen or your outcomes. Another example is by the end of 2020 or in the first quarter of 2025, Art Support Kansas City will offer 2 educational webinars featuring the work of successful artists working in the Kansas City region with 50 plus people in attendance to further its mission of supporting local artists. And this is how that breaks down into our SMART goals. The quarter 2025 is time bound. In Kansas City region, working with successful artists is specific. We have 50 people we want in attendance. That's measurable and achievable, and it's furthering our mission, so it is relevant. So what about how we relate it back to our Voices and Votes and Democracy in America exhibit that several of you are here because of? You're going to have this coming to your community. So let's put together a goal. During the 45 days of Voices and Votes that it is displayed in ABC Community, County Museum will host 4 events for high school students with local guests, speakers to address the importance of voting in America today. How does that break down? During the 45 days of Voices and Votes is displayed in ABC Community, there's our time bound. County Museum will host 4 events for high school students with local guest speakers. It's both measurable, specific, and achievable to address the importance of voting in America today. And so it is relevant. So that poses a question, is how could we create a goal using data to create a stronger outcome for the Voices and Votes exhibit in your community? And that's where I am going to stop my share because Jamie is going to take over and talk to you a little bit all things Missouri and how you can find resources and find data. Oh, and Jamie, you're on mute.
I swear I hit that button. All right, thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate it. And are you guys seeing my All Things Missouri screen? Yes. Okay, great. So yeah, as Jackie mentioned, one of the best ways to make sure that you have SMART goals and that you're meeting the objectives of an RFP or a grant application is to make sure that you have the right data to support your argument or whatever it is that you're applying for, and that you have taken a look at the landscape of potential partnerships, collaborations, and overlap. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is ways to find some of that information on All Things Missouri. So first and foremost, if you want to visit or follow along, you can go to allthingsmissouri.org. It's a free website. You don't have to log in or have any special credentials to access it. On this site, we host over 30,000 data layers, and those data layers come from over 120 different national secondary sources. And then we also try to pull as much data as we can from Missouri specific sources as well. So things like state agencies and other foundations and organizations from across the state. So we have some major sections here on the site. You can see that we have maps, reports, and resources. So what I'm really going to focus with you all today is on our maps section, but would definitely encourage you guys to check out some of the other things that are available on the site. So as Jackie was talking about, one of the things that we like to do, or a lot of grants require, is asset mapping or collaboration. And so using the All Things Missouri map room, this kind of looks crazy right now because we're zoomed way out and we're seeing all of Missouri. But what you're able to do is find other local organizations, different types of businesses like hospitals and nonprofits that may be collaborators, that may be doing the same type of work, or that may be folks that you want to just be connected with in order to, grow the base of people that you're serving. So this is an example of an asset map. We can zoom into a specific area. So if I wanted to, for example, go to Greene County, I could zoom into Greene County, Missouri, or other parts of the state. And my map's kind of reloading here. But what it's going to do is it's going to show me what I see over here on the left-hand side, which is exempt organizations. So things like churches, as I had mentioned, different types of churches that are available that are around the communities, exempt organizations. And the really nice part about this layer, it comes to us from the IRS, is that it kind of tells us exactly what kind of nonprofit it is. So rather than just points on a map showing locations of nonprofits, we can get a little bit more specific, and we can see that there are arts, culture, and humanity nonprofits, civil rights and social action and advocacy, community development and capacity building, and the list really goes on and on, housing, shelter, food. And so that will give you an idea or a better way to drill down to those possible collaborators within the community. We can also look at things like disaster shelters or other types of community services that are available. And so this is a great way to really, like I said, make sure that not only you understand what assets are also in your community that you might be able to build upon or leverage as part of your grant application, but there are a lot of grant applications now that do require collaboration, or they at least require you to note whether there's anybody else in your service area doing the same type of work. And so this can really help you find that information, learn more about the other types of organizations in your area and other types of assets, and maybe even find some collaborators, which is what I always hope for when we do these types of asset mapping. The other thing that I want to mention is that many times grant applications require you to define the population that you're going to serve, right? Is it a geographic area? Is it a group of people? And so that is another way that you can utilize All Things Missouri, is to find those demographics. So the map that I have pulled up here isn't the most exciting map, right? But it tells us so much. So the layer that we're looking at right now is population, age, age 18 to 24. So that would be our early voters, right? Folks that are just now either getting the chance to vote, maybe they turned 18 when it wasn't an election cycle and they're just coming around to that. And this gives you an idea of really where those folks are concentrated, right? So again, we could zoom into different parts of the state and be able to click the map and get a better idea. So we can see here, for example, in Osage County, we have about 625 folks that are of that age 18 to 24 that we could reach out to, that we could start to target, right, around education or getting them involved in different types of democracy or voices to action programming. So that's one way to do this. And we're looking at these data at a tract level, so it's smaller than a county most of the time, but we can, in fact, look at it at a county level if we want to do that. And so there's my map's going to load. So we can look at those numbers at a county level, or we could look at it at a state senate district level, a school district level, maybe zip codes. It really depends on how you want to define your area or the area that you serve. Some of the other layers that I have loaded here are other examples of demographics that you could pull. And I just want to mention that the more specific that you can be, I think the better when it comes to defining that audience or defining who you're going to serve. And so this is an example of looking at, this is population age 0 to 4. So maybe we're trying to target those youngest kids that aren't quite in school yet. And we want to make sure that we're targeting maybe a certain race or ethnicity, so Hispanic or Latino. We want to do some outreach with those folks or develop some programming to support those folks. And so here we can start to get a sense, again, of how many kids age 0 to 4 are in any specific area. And I think that those types of data are going to be set you apart, right, from some other grant applications. So rather than just saying, we've got this many kids in the county, we can really start to drill down and say, not only do we have this many kids in our county, we have this many kids that identify as Hispanic or Latino. Maybe you would go even farther and look at language access, right? If you're looking at maybe some bilingual programming. Some other types of demographics that we make available are students eligible for free and reduced price lunch. This is on so many grant applications, and it's information that's pretty easy to find. And here we have it actually by school. So if I were to click any of these little dots here on the map, you'll see that it'll tell me the school's name, the school district, how many total students there are, and then it'll give me information about how many students are eligible for reduced price, free lunch, and free and reduced price lunch. So again, it does help you get down, drill down, and get very specific about how many students or how many people are you actually going to be serving with this grant and where are they located. A couple of other layers that I just included as examples is things like unemployed workers. We can look at that specifically around female and male populations. We also have these data available by age, race, and ethnicity as well. And then also median household income, poverty levels, those types of things are always, a lot of times are asked on grant applications as well. So here we can see at a tract level what median household income looks like around the center of the state. And so those are just some examples of the types of demographics that grant applications often ask you for. We have a lot more in here. These are just a few examples to get you guys started and get your wheels turning. The other piece of this is really around issues, right? And thinking about how do we better define the issue or opportunity that's available in our community. And so once you've gotten past your demographic part, you can start to think about, are there specific kinds of data that would help you really tell a story about what's going on in your community? And so there are things that I've just kind of pulled out here to demonstrate that related to equity. We have data around our gender pay gap, right? So how big is the delta delta between what male and female workers make? And is that an issue in my county or my area? You can see some of the counties here in Missouri, that rate is pretty high, and some of it's pretty low. And so that can help you start to tell that story, that our counties experience a very high, gap pay and gap between female and male workers, but the counties around us aren't experiencing the same types of things. So that's one example. We also have data, for example, around loans to non-Hispanic Black applicants. So things that related to mortgage lending, historic redlining, those kinds of things. So are we doing a good job of making loans and mortgage and banking available to all populations? Or are some populations getting a better deal than others, right? So you can look at that type of thing. We also have data related to environmental risks. So this is one of my newer, more favorite layers, I guess. This is from the EPA, looking at disadvantaged communities that also have high rates of different types of environmental risk. So this one specifically is looking at Superfund proximity. So how close is your community to a Superfund of some kind? We have things like underground storage tanks and other types of air and water risk exposures as well. So that again is a way for you to be able to start to tell a story, both historically and current. What are some of the things that have happened in the past? What are the current conditions? And then what is it that you're hoping to change as you move forward? Specifically related to your voices and votes, we do have data related to voter turnout. We don't quite have the 2024 election available to us yet, but we do have voter turnout from 2020. So you can see what that looks like here across the state. And then we do also have another proxy that we typically use is census response rates, or ACS response rates. And so my map is slowly loading here. You can see here what the census response rates look like. So this kind of gives us a nice proxy of civic engagement and how engaged people are in their community, and what they do to provide information back to the government. And so those are just a few examples that you can hopefully, like I said, to get your wheels turning as you're thinking about grants that you might want to apply for. Not only how do you really define that audience or the people that you're going to serve, the area that you're going to serve, but then how do you really help people understand the severity of a problem or the grandeur of an opportunity? How do you help people understand, what has happened historically, but what are current conditions? And then, you might also discover something along the way too about your community that you didn't know before. And so just wanted to mention that all of these maps are available on All Things Missouri. I went ahead and I created a couple of maps of those maps for you all. So if you visit our map gallery, you'll see here there is a basic demographics for grant applications. That'll take you right to that same map that I just created for you all. We also have some data related to that equity. So I did some equity indicators for grant applications, and then an asset map as well for you all. So that should be easy to find. And the one thing I want to say too is that in our maps and our reports, the other important piece to note here is we think about our SMART goals is also how do we, we're going to make them measurable, right? But how do we make sure that we're making our goals realistic? And so that's another great way to use these maps, is to be able to say, well, the median household income, for example, in my area is low, and I want to increase that or work to increase that through workforce development programs, let's say, for example. But what is that number, right? Should we increase it by 1%, 2%? Is it $10,000? Is it $5,000? And being able to see what the conditions are around you, what other counties or census tracts are experiencing, will give you an idea of really how far you can move that needle. And when you look at things like state and national averages, that'll also give you a nice benchmark to work with to be able to say, okay, Missouri is doing a little bit better than our area. Maybe we meet that goal of how Missouri is doing, and then we go beyond that afterwards. So there's a lot of ways that you can utilize these maps and the data that are included in these maps to support your SMART goals, to support things like asset mapping and your application. And as Jackie's going to talk about, also how to support your logic models. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it right back over to Jackie. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen again. If I can figure out how to in this webinar. There we go. All right. So we are now back at looking at step 5C, which 5C is we've got our collaborators that Jamie talked about, we've got our data, and how are we going to put all that together to create a path? And so we've got here just a quick diagram of a logic model. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about why logic models are great assets to use, why they're helpful, and then kind of break the components down, and then put one together for you at the end. So basically, what is a logic model? So think of a logic model as a map that Jamie, kind of like what Jamie was just talking about. It's a map that's going to get you to point A to point B. It's going to get you from the start of your project to the finish of your project, which is your final outcome. Logic models create connections between the resources you have, or maybe in the case of writing grants, the resources you need, and then the activities that you want to provide and the outcomes you want to achieve. They help you determine success. Logic models can help you to ensure that you're making progress and you're doing what you said you were going to do in when you developed your program. And then finally, logic models help you to easily explain to others why you're utilizing specific resources, why you're conducting specific activities, all in an attempt to achieve that specific outcome that you've stated in your goals. So why are logic models helpful? Logic models give a structure to your efforts. I don't know how many times in my early career I just started going, oh, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and all of a sudden it's going to come together and make this great project or these great outcomes. Oh my. Logic models give you structure. They help you with the state of flow. They help you answer questions like, if we do this, then this will happen. And if we do this, then we anticipate this outcome. So it gives you that structure. Logic models help create connections to the goals that you've defined. So you're seeing a common thread between your activities and your intended outcomes. It keeps you potentially from taking on too many resources or activities that don't relate to your intended incomes or outcomes. Logic models help you identify gaps in your program. So as you're creating a logic model, you might understand or start to realize that you're missing pieces, potentially resources, or for example, grant funding or other things. And finally, logic models are beneficial because funding agencies can see a clear path between your activities and what you're intending to do. So your outcomes. So what you're trying to achieve, what you're making your project based around, and that makes it clear to those reviewers. So let's look at the basic components of a logic model. And we're going to go quickly over these on slide by slide. But if you research on the internet logic models, you may get a different logic model than what I'm presenting today. There are so many different ones out there, but typically they include a situation statement, inputs, outputs, outcomes, and then some assumptions and external factors. So let's look at these basic components. Your situation statement is the foundation of your project or program, and this is going to drive your purpose. The statement usually considers the issue that you intend to address, why it's important, who it affects, potentially addresses stakeholders that you're going to work with, and then it kicks off that challenge of discovering what can we actually do about it. So I put together an example of a situation and statement might include or might be appreciation for the arts is declining statewide because school districts are underfunded and unable to provide a variety of arts programming to students. That is an issue statement because it gets you motivated to do something about it. So the next component is your inputs, and your inputs are your resources, and these can include people, the people you have on staff or who you have volunteers that can help you deliver programs. It can include money, what cash or donations do you have at your disposal, time, how much time have you allocated to this issue to work on this? What research do you have? Do you need to do research? And then materials. Have you materials already? Do you need to create some materials or do you need to buy materials? Are there some that are pre-made? And then facilities. What facilities are at your disposal? And this is one of those things that those of you on the call today that are going to be hosts for the Voices and Votes exhibit, you've already done some of this. You've had to determine if you have the people and the facilities and the time to host that exhibit. And so you've put some of those inputs and that thought process together before you submitted your application. So what are your outputs? Your outputs are the utilization of your inputs that you currently have and or are going to obtain and those activities and services, events that you plan to offer as part of your program. Will you offer tours, hands-on activities, sit-down lectures, guest speakers, research, events? What are you actually going to do as part of your project or program? And these are things that can be measured. You can say, we're going to provide 10 tours and lectures. We're going to have 50 visitors per day, and we're going to create 15 handouts and 20 social media posts. So those are things that you can concretely say that you are delivering for those outputs. And at this point, you also want to identify your participants, or what I like to call our audience. And Jamie alluded to this in her presentation. Who are the prime targets for your program or project? If you're wanting to target those early voters or those young adult voters, you can find that out. Make sure that that's specific. Um, this is one of those times when you don't want to put who's your audience. Everyone's our audience. No, no one is ever your entire audience. So what about outcomes? When we look at outcomes, outcomes are the results of the benefits of your projects, and they typically are a little bit more complicated to measure, but than inputs, but or outputs, but they're more important nonetheless. And you can have short-term, long-term, mid-term for your programs and projects. And so when you think about short-term, what did people learn by touring your exhibit? Did they gain knowledge, a new skill? Maybe you can measure this by when they walk out the door. Hey, what did you learn by going through the exhibit? Or you could maybe send out a short survey or have them complete a survey. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about methods. That's a whole nother webinar on its own of measurement. But you can also have midterm outcomes. So basically looking at what behaviors changed by as a result for going through a program or being involved in a project. Maybe as a result of attending a lecture, um, participants started thinking differently. Maybe they started reading up on a new subject. And those are hard to find because once they leave your facility or leave your program, you're not always sure what they're doing or what they're thinking afterwards. But if you've put together some SMART goals using data, your long-term impacts may be easier to measure because you could look at trends to see if there are changes occurring in your community. So, for example, maybe as a result of your program, more people are enrolling in arts programs at the local rec center over time. And those students are choosing careers in fine arts. Those would be long-term impacts that you can measure at your local universities through the data that Jamie showed you, all things that can be measured, and that's building capacity. And so the last two components of your logic model are assumptions and external factors. And you can't have this conversation without considering these because your assumptions are your beliefs that your program's going to work. So for example, if I host a lecture, I'm going to have to assume that people are going to be interested in what I'm presenting and are going to come and listen and pay attention when they're there. That is an assumption as I put together a program. And as for the external factors, there will always be factors outside of our control that may influence success. So you may have students that are seeking fine arts degrees because the school district had a benefactor leave a bunch of money to them and they could create all these different programs. And it really has nothing to do with the lecture that you provided. So you always have to consider some of those assumptions and external factors. So this is what your logic model looks as a whole package from beginning situation to your outputs and impacts. And so let's look at what it might look as an example. So if we're looking at the Votes and Voices exhibit in your community, maybe the situation you identify is that fewer young adults are voting because they feel that their votes don't matter. And Jamie showed us how we can find data that maybe could substantiate our concerns or our situation statement. Our inputs include the staff and volunteers and the resources and space and funding availability that we have available to host an exhibit. Maybe while our outputs include us providing meaningful interactions with the young adults in our community, maybe through trained volunteers, tours, workshops, and other educational events. So then we move on to outcomes because once they participate, you anticipate that they're going to gain knowledge of how their vote impacts their community or their state or their nation. And then they're going to go out for that midterm and seek out. The hope is that they're going to seek out more information on local, state, and national elections. And then that long term impact that we're looking for is, did that move the needle on our young adults voting in our community? So now we do have to consider the assumptions and the external factors, though. Will young adults attend and learn from the presentation that we're making? And then are there other forces that are keeping them from voting? Meaning, maybe it's not a major election year, or maybe there's some voter registration laws that they're not in compliance with. So that's a quick look at logic models, and we could spend all day looking at logic models, but we want to get back. And so we're back on track to step 6, where we're going to actually, write through a proposal for our grant application. And we've had some time to think about what we want included in our proposal. We have the activities and we have the goals. And so now we're going to look at that application and we're going to outline specific information in the manner that the granting agency wants. Typically, your larger state and federal agencies and large foundations will have an application. You will be filling in blanks. That's where they're going to ask you, what is your Senate district in your community, for your community? What is that free and reduced lunch? That's where Jamie's data is going to help you answer some of those questions. But sometimes for our smaller foundations, they might just say, answer these questions in a Word document and submit it. So that's where you want to use that goal and that logic model and put together your activities in a logical manner. No matter what, in your proposal, you want to make sure that you follow their instructions and answer all their questions. If it is a granting agency that provides a scoring rubric, and this is a tip, if there is a scoring framework that they've provided with the application materials, open that document up and read it from top to bottom and make sure your answers and your responses align with that scoring rubric, and so you can maximize your points. You also want to do like the typical, make sure that your margin widths and your page numbers and you're using their recommended type and font. Not every not every grant application will give you those guidelines, but if they do, you make sure you want to follow them because your presentation or your proposal could be discarded if not written in their formats. So ensure that you're meeting their requirements. Step 7 is you're going to create your budget. Again, we could spend an entire 1-hour webinar and just scratch the surface of budgets, but you want to make sure that your budgets present all the expenses that you are going to incur to carry out your project and program as you have defined in your proposal. So all the activities, you have to make sure that they're included in your budget. Make sure that they are eligible expenses. So the guidelines, make sure you're reading those to make sure that if you have an activity or something that you need to purchase, you can do so. A lot of times, I've seen in the past where somebody says, "Oh, well, I'm just going to throw a new computer in this grant proposal." Well, equipment is not an eligible expense, so make sure you know what is and isn't. You also want to make sure that if you are purchasing equipment in your grant, that if you need to procure bids and estimates, that you're doing that early in the process so that you can have time to get those to include. Um, Basically, some type or mostly your grant applications will ask for a narrative. So you'll do kind of like a spreadsheet of your budget, and then you'll answer narrative questions or give more feedback. So when you say we're going to hire somebody for a project at $25,000, break down how much that is per hour, how many hours they're going to dedicate to this specific project, and do they have salary benefits and indirect or overhead expenses on top of that. If you have collaborators providing match for your project, be specific of this in your letters of support and detail that in your narrative budget. So you've gone through, you've found some great collaborators using Jamie's maps. Make sure that you get the documentation, letters of support from them, and put those into your application if applicable. And again, do that early in the process as well. And then again, I just want to make sure that I stress that all your expenditures have to be related to your activities. Indirect expenses, I don't have a lot of time to go into indirect, but make sure that if they allow for indirect that you use it, because that helps keep your lights on, helps keep your internet working in your organization. So indirect is a very valuable component of a grant if it is an eligible expense. Finally, you're going to revise your proposal. I always recommend that you have at least 2 other sets of eyes look at your application, make sure that your spelling, your punctuation, your grammatical mistakes are all corrected. But you also want to make sure that your grant is clear and it's logical. So finding somebody outside your organization is always a plus, so that they can kind of remove that bias from the review. Um, you also want to make sure that you're reviewing that you have all required attachments in your grant, and that they are attached in a logical order. If a grant application says we need this, and this, put them in your grant application in this, and this order. So it makes it easier for those reviewers to understand. Make sure they're labeled. A lot of typical grant applications are going to request your bylaws, your tax status, are you 501c3, articles of incorporation, are you in good standing with the Secretary of State? So make sure you have those kind of in your back pocket and ready to go for grant applications. And we're at the final step. Just submit it on time. Submit your grant on time is usually the grant applications will have hard deadlines. And you want to make sure that you receive that they receive your application on time. Early is better. You want to make sure that you account for any little snafus along the way. If you are submitting by snail mail, I would recommend certifying your application so that you get a delivery receipt and someone signs for it at the funding agency. If you are going through a portal or through an email, um, just bank on there's going to be issues. There's going to be an error. There's going to be something that's not going to submit right. I'm going to have forgotten to do something. And so I need to make sure that I have a little bit of time to work through those technical errors. One thing I did mention or forget to say when we started, when I was talking about revising the proposal, make sure everything on your application is signed and signed by the right person in your organization that has the authority to sign the documents. So if you are a nonprofit that works for a board of directors, that may be your board of directors, it may be your executive director, depending on who has the authority to sign documents such as this. So always make sure that you know who needs to sign, and before you submit that you have enough time for them to submit those documents and get them signed. With that, what happens next? This is the end. So unfortunately, my response is you wait. In my profession, grant awards or denials are never quick. sometimes 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months down the road. And in that time, you have to wait. Depending on the granting agency, it may be several months. And I've even had some where they never tell you. So be ready to check in with your contact and say, hey, I was under the impression that these are supposed to be awarded by August 26th. It's August 27th. Can you provide an update? If your grant is awarded, please follow all the guidelines to accept the award. And that includes the execution of award documents and the timing of expenditures. Just because you received an email saying that received a grant doesn't mean you can go out and start spending money. You need to wait until all documents are signed and it is official and you get the green light. I have not, I have seen so many projects stalled or have to pay money back because they didn't follow the guidelines on completing the requirements of the execution of award documents. If you have budget adjustments, they can be made. Just connect with your contact and make sure that you know how you have to do that, what the guidelines are for budget adjustments, and then make sure you follow through on reporting. If your proposal is not selected for funding, understand that grant proposal success rate is low. Everybody is working on grants and wants to find grants to help support their programming. And there's a lot of great programs out there. But if you're not funded, many of the programs, you can contact them and the reviewers will give their thoughts and their feedback to you in writing. If they don't do it, request it because you may want to apply for this grant the next time it is open. But with a word of caution, if you decide to apply for the same grant in the future, be sure to address the reviewer's feedback as well as read through the guidelines again, because very rarely are there not changes made to application processes or funding priorities may have changed throughout the year. So make sure you attend to that, you read through the process and go through your 9 steps again. With that, here are our resources. We've got links in the resources that you'll get in an email from Nick to All Things Missouri. You'll have a direct extension to Dr. Ray's Finding Agricultural Business Development with Federal State Grants guide sheet that is what was the basis for the 9 steps, as well as a few other things that I used to put together. I highly recommend going to the University of Wisconsin. This link is everywhere. I mean, they have like a 7-session course on logic models. It is overkill, but highly worth it. So that is the presentation. Unless Jamie, you have anything else you want to add, we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, I think a couple people had asked questions about like, what if you're a new nonprofit or you haven't, you just established your organization. And I'll just say personally from experience, a lot of times that's when your collaborators can come in and serve either as fiscal agents or as sponsors that may have things like audits and other, historical financial documents that you might need for the grant. But Jackie, do you have any other thoughts on that, on new organizations?
With new organizations, there's so many little nuances that you have to have in place. You want to make sure you have, I'm sorry, I was trying to read some of those, and if I repeat, I'm sorry. But, your Secretary of State documentation, all that work that you've done, you may, if you're a new nonprofit, you may not be ready to apply for a grant. I will make a quick plug. Extension is putting together a new program called Nonprofit Technical Assistance. If you are starting a new nonprofit and you have questions about your 501c3 status or tax exempt or filling out Secretary of State's, email me. I have about 6 other colleagues that we're parceling out that information to that can help answer some of those questions. So, did you see any other questions, Jamie or Nick, that I didn't catch?
Jamie got me on the new nonprofits one. That's the one that I saw that really stood out. I think that was about it, other than reporting. But I feel like we covered that. So I
Mhm.
mean, check that, rewatch the webinar, and review that again. But yeah, a lot of great information, Jackie and Jamie. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. And I think I
Awesome.
saw one person asked what my relationship with Kansas was, and I'll just answer
Yeah,
that.
that was in the
I
beginning.
I worked for the MoCan Regional Council, and we served 4 counties in Missouri and 3 counties in Kansas. So I still lived in Missouri and worked in Missouri, but served some of Kansas. So that'll answer your question for the person that asked that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, Jackie and Jamie, for presenting today. That was a lot of great information. Like they said, I'll this afternoon I'll send out an email with the recording of today's workshop and all the links and information that was shared today, including the slides. To make sure that you get that email, add my email address to your contacts, and I'll share that in this chat. But it's Nick, NICK, at mohumanities.org. If you're interested in grants from Missouri Humanities specifically, we give out those grants each year. We have two mini and major grants. Mini grants fund projects up to $5,000. The first cycle is April 1st to May 1st, and the second is October 1st to November 1st for the mini grants. Our major grants fund projects up to $15,000. That cycle is actually currently open and closes on February 1st. The second cycle is July 1st and August 1st. And I'll share those in the email that I sent out this afternoon. But other than that, that's all I have. Thank you again, Jackie and Jamie. And if you guys have anything you want to share, go ahead.
Just thanks for having us, and don't hesitate to reach out if you do have questions or need support. That's what Extension is here for, so don't feel like you're bothering us. If we can't find the answer, we've got a whole network of people that we can tap into.
Absolutely. Ditto to what Jamie said, and thank you for having us.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Stay safe and stay warm out there.